Om Shruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavad Padam Shankaram Loka Shankaram Sadasiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam Shankaram Shankaracharyam Kesavam Badarayanam Sutravashya Kritau Vande Bhagavantau Punah Punaha. Good. Wednesday, Aparokshanubhuti, and we're getting into quite meaty sections now. Okay, what does anybody remember or anything come to mind from last week? This is your opportunity for your mind to go completely blank, which is what most people say when I uttered that sentence. What do you remember from last week?
I had a couple of points requiring clarification.
All right, okay, clarification. All right, good.
Possibly. So was it verse 31? It seemed to be making out that original consciousness was the ego, or it seemed like it could have been going that way, but the notes pulled back slightly from going in that direction. And I was wondering on what basis to be trying to interpret this bit of the introduction in comparison to stuff we've done in other Upanishads like Ahamkara and the bird on the tree and stuff, whether this is purely just setting up the mind is not the body, you are not the body, and ignore what else you know at this stage.
Yes, I think it's just setting it up so that it can be knocked down again. So it's to most people, Purusha, the Supreme Purusha, they think is the I, it is the ego. But actually the verse carries on and actually the explanation says that no, that is not the case. So I think it's a false, what do they call it when you set something up only to knock it down afterwards?
Straw man.
Yeah, it's like a straw man, and it's not the ego, but to most people, they think that there is only one consciousness per individual, and the I is definitely the ego. They consider themselves the Purusha because they're the body, and all of that is what they think, but that's actually not the way it is. So I think it is more of a straw man, more of a poetic license at this point.
Yeah, and the second one was verse 38, where it says Atman's different to the body, endures after the fall of the body, and keeps the fruit of its actions, which presumably is also not really the case.
So yes, it's not Atman that Atman continues. The fruit of the actions are actually held by the subtle body. So I'm trying to figure out.
But verse 38 specifically says it's the Atman keeps the fruits of the actions.
Right. Okay. So what verse 38 says is that that all religions and even the Vedas themselves in the Karma Kanda separates the fact that there is a body which is gone after death, and then there is something else that carries on afterwards and retains the attributes and moves on. So the Karma Kanda is trying to say to people, be good, do all of these rituals, and you will get sufficient sufficient punya to go to heaven. All right. And so this concept of body and soul is first of all introduced in Karma Kanda, as it is in all religions, where if you study any religion, you come to realize that the ultimate you, the one that transmigrates, cannot be the body, because the body either gets buried or burnt. And in all religions, they say after your death, which means that after the body has gone, you will actually go elsewhere. So even if we just studied the Karma Kanda itself, you could say, without knowing anything about Vedanta, you could actually say, well, the body and whatever it is I am, that I'll call Atma for now, are clearly different, because I'm told that the Atma then travels. And the Karma Kanda talks about the fact that you are responsible for your own actions and the results of your actions, and all the doctrine of karma is also there. So at that time, before you've got into Vedanta, to understand what Atma really is separated the body and the bit that is not the body that transmigrates.
Yeah. So you really have to take the work as a whole and not quote verses out of context whatsoever.
Exactly. And remember that we're going softly, softly. And you'll see this week how going down this route comes a great junction point, and you have to cross that junction. So that's going to be quite interesting later on, hopefully, in today's class. Anything else that comes to mind?
Yeah, I've got something, Ram.
Yeah.
And I might end up ambling because I'm not quite sure how I'm going to really put this together. But the one that really stuck out to me was the one line at the end of verse 33. How can this dirty body be taken as pure Chaitanya?
Yes.
And I actually found that probably the most provocative line we've had in this entire text so far. Despite all the finger pointing of ignorance on people and whatnot, but that line really is quite something. And I think for me, it resonated from the point of, from the Ayurveda, how we look at the body as perfection, and we look at it that it is perfect and it is born perfect, because there is perfect, pure Chaitanya that gives it that existence, and that thus we experience it. And so that particular line kept going around in my little head, and then almost coming back to what the bit that Tim had pulled out too, actually, this notion of ego, this identity. And I suppose, we were looking at it from the infinite, from the greatest to the smallest, and we were looking at the body as the smallest, and just probably because of the way my head works, I was going smaller. I was going to a cellular level looking at this, because again, in Ayurveda, we will look at each cell as having its own identity. A cardiac cell knows it's a cardiac cell, and a liver cell knows it's a liver cell, but they will come from a stem cell, and that stem cell put in that environment will become that cell. And so it gets an ego, it gets an identity.
Yes.
And it knows what its job is.
Yes.
And, that also, kind of feels that, without Chaitanya, there would be none of that. But then at some point, I think in the next verse, we say this is possible because of Maya. But then that's the only reference we bring into Maya at this point, and then we don't come back to Maya at this point. So there were so many things, but I think it was this notion, because without the Chaitanya, there is no idea of even the body. And that one line, that dirty body can never be pure Chaitanya, which is very, very strong.
Okay. Let's start with that, because that's a clear, good, and Adi Shankara uses that line in a lot of other places. So first of all, from an Ayurvedic perspective, what you mean by a perfect body is that the body is perfect, that given its original state and not adulterated by lifestyle and so forth, it's in a perfect position to be able to cure all ailments that might come to it. It is the perfect setup, and I agree with you entirely. What Adi Shankara wants to say is that what is the body full of? And he says is full of pus and and blood and urine and feces. And the only thing that is making this body anywhere remotely nice is the skin that's holding all of this mess together and behind it. And then we have to bathe that skin, that outer coating, on a regular basis. Otherwise, what state does it go to? So he describes the body purely from the physical aspects of it is a container full of the most obnoxious liquids and solids that you'd really not like presented on a table in front of you. So in that sense, it is a dirty body, and that's
Sure.
what he means by that. And he wanted to make the difference between that and the purity, right? And he wanted to make that contrast very sharp, and therefore he called it a dirty body in that way. And we get the second part of your question, if I recall, was the idea that every single cell is effectively a sentient being, if you like, part of a collective whole. And we indeed, as human beings, are only a collection of all types of things. In fact, most of the things inside us are not of human origin anyway. So we're a collection of all of these things, and all of these things, if they have a subtle body, they have a level of sentiency. The sentiency they have is dependent upon the quality of the reflective medium. So it can be considered that all of these things are sentient, and therefore they come to know. And when they come to know, they're coming to know through a reflected consciousness. And that reflected consciousness knower, the lower knower, is I, the ego. So it's through that lower knower that you know that a cell knows that who it is. All right. And as a bigger, a liver knows what it is when it's a collection of a lot of cells. So in that way it's known, but the ultimate knower, that's why there's two knowers. There's the knower who knows at the ego level through reflected consciousness, and there's the knower through the original consciousness. The difference between them is that the knowing at the lower level is the verb to know, and at the higher level is that by which things are known, in the presence of which something is known. Without their presence, something is not known. It's the sort of, almost, if you like, the facilitator of the knowing process rather than the knowing verb. And that's the difference between the two knowers. But you're right, every single celled creature is also sentient in its own particular way. That's why plants are sentient in their own particular way. May have very limited intelligence, grow towards the light, grow towards water, whatever, but they do observe that, and people talk to them, and the talking to plants apparently helps them to grow. And we discussed somewhere, what was it, Bhagavad Gita, that moonlight's effect on seeds actually promote growth in seeds. So yes, I take your point, but that's what he wanted to say. And remember, he's writing a book here. This is Aparokshanubhuti. It's not Shruti, it's not revealed text, it's authored text by Adi Shankara. So he takes great fun in trying to go very strong and deep in this, so that it stays memorable in people's minds.
Oh, it does, and I find it particularly fascinating, this, especially this notion, a little bit like what you were just saying about this reflected medium.
Yes.
And you put something in a certain medium, and it grows in a certain way. In the same sense, if I took the same stem cell and put it in a liver medium, it would grow a liver cell. But the same thing, if I put it in a cardiac region, would grow a cardiac cell. And similarly, as we go through life from this perfect body that we started with, and it gets adulterated, that medium changes too. And so when you see that sense of I starts to expand rapidly and proliferates terribly, we get all sorts of diseases setting in. I suppose I can't help but correlate it all back into this bodily function.
Yeah, but you must also separate the two. So
right.
when cells grow from a stem cell to a particular type of cell, or there's only any evolution of a creature, the evolution is at an inert level, right? It is the medium that is growing. that is evolving. What drives, enlivens that medium into life is the pure consciousness. So you get a change in state of the medium, and the medium gets different qualities, just as plants and animals have different media, and they themselves are evolving, they're growing into, and you're getting mutations and things forming. But it's the consciousness of them, is the sentiency of them. What makes them non-inert is the pure consciousness. All right. So at all times, you've got this duality, that you have this consciousness, but in order for it to manifest, it needs a medium to manifest into. And therefore, you might get a planet which has got nothing but lava. All right. And therefore, consciousness has got nothing to manifest into to create sentiency. It's not that consciousness isn't there, but it's just in lava form, which is currently inert. Right? It doesn't have a subtle body because it is molten rock. And when there is such a thing as something with a subtle body, then consciousness will manifest in that too. So there's always this parallel, the mediums developing, and consciousness comes in and creates sentiency within them. Okay. Good question. Anybody else with anything?
I've got a question. It may be from the week before. I'm getting a bit mixed up because I've done both on catch up. I just wasn't sure what this meant, and it got me all in a tizzy because it's on verse 25. So at the end of verse 25 in the notes, it talks about it, it's continually kind of reinforcing, I'm not the body, I am formless, I am all pervading. And then at the end of the notes on 25, it says, only when I know this for sure, without a shadow of a doubt, will I be free from suffering of the body, suffering of the world and its environment, and suffering from God. And that's what I got confused about. It's like, if I didn't understand what that meant, suffering from God.
Right. The suffering from God is the fact that when you think you're the body, and I think it comes up this week as well, you're in samsara. Why do we say you're in samsara? Because you're limited by space and time. All right. When you're limited by space, that is the limitation of separation. That when you think that there is this concept of space, that you're not everything, that you are infinitesimally small, whether it's at an emotional level, oh, somebody's ignoring me, somebody's gone away from me, that we were really close. We tend to space in terms of a separation, whether it's physical or emotional separation. People are lonely, I'm all alone, my children are elsewhere, they never visit, so that leads to a huge amount of samsara, because you feel yourself to be separate from all the other objects in the world, right? And time is a great samsara element, because with time comes mortality, right? So immediately, if you feel that you're in the grips of time, then you become mortal. And with not just, death shouldn't worry you that much, because when you snuff it, that's it, right? But it's the fact that you're aging, right? That's the slow death of aging will get to you. And these things start to affect you. So both at a level of spatial awareness and a dimension, space, and in time, these things come to attack you and create samsara. So you have it towards people, you have it towards objects, you have it towards God. Because when something happens to you as a result of deficiency of space and time, all right, then you need somebody to blame. And typically you blame God. Why not? All right. Why has my child stopped talking to me? I didn't do anything at all. Why am I in the early stages of Alzheimer's or my legs falling off? Why me, God? I've done so well and I've prayed to you all the time, and you come and do this. So you actually build up a whole tension with God also. When you run out of people and situations to blame, then the next step up is to blame God.
But in the non-dual sense, then I'm blaming myself
So,
and blaming everyone
yeah,
and
but
everything
that's
because
why
I'm all pervading.
yeah, that's why you mustn't. That's exactly right. So once you feel associated with the body, you're in the limitations of space and time. And once you're in space and time, you are in the dualistic world. And in dualistic world comes samsara. And there you blame everybody, including God. So the
Okay.
only way out of this, out of samsara, is not to be associated with the body. All right.
Okay.
And as a result, you come out of samsara and stop blaming God. Okay. Does that make more sense? Okay.
I think it's sometimes just the way it's worded, and then they're kind of like just yeah, it's the way we are interpreting words to kind of mean one thing, and then what you've just said is what I understood it to mean.
Yeah,
But then I was like,
and the thing is, it's quite provocative. Whenever you put the word God in a sentence, there's immediately people from inside out swells up this emotional thing that I thought God was a good guy, and what am I talking about? You know, something that might be going wrong between me and God, and all this sort of thing. So, but it's deliberately placed, I have to tell you, because it makes people think. Good.
okay,
All right.
thank you.
Anything else? Will, did you have a story to share before we get into the text?
Yeah, I just wary of the time, Ram. Shall I still do it or?
Yeah, might as well. Yeah, carry on.
Yeah, so this is from Sardapriya when he did Aparokshan, the same verses we did last week. And it's a story. I love all the stories that everyone puts out, and this one really resonates. And so I thought I'd share it if you haven't heard it already, because I find it very useful when I can remember it in situations. So it starts off with a guru and a disciple. So they're walking along a path in a forest, and the disciple says, I wish I could be free from the grip of samsara. It's so difficult. Please free me. And the guru then walks to a big tree and puts his arms around it and shouts, oh, the tree has caught me. Set me free, set me free. And then the disciple says, but the tree has not caught you. You are catching hold of the tree, so just let go. So in that sense, if you only let go of your grip of the tree, you'll be okay. So in the same way with samsara, we've got hold of samsara in the same way. So if we let go of that grip, it's like a rope dragging you through life. So you can't hold on to anything, not a thought, emotion, friends, relationships, etc. Just hold on to nothing. You can still enjoy the world, but just hold on to nothing. So yeah, I just kind of, that's quite, I don't know, it just works for me. So I thought might help others. It's a great story, simple, but
Yeah,
you know.
thank you for that. That's lovely. So yes, and it is through these anecdotes that one remembers the message. It comes back every now and again. So if something works for you, then remember the story, recite it to other people, and use it by all means. Okay, we're a long way into Q&A. So if there's nothing else, I believe that we've completed verse 38 and we were starting 39, if that's okay. All right. And the translation reads, even the subtle body consists of many parts and is unstable. It is also an object of perception. It is changeable, limited, and non-existent by nature. So how can this be the Purusha? So you recall that he spent a very long time saying that we're not the body, and then finally he thought, enough is enough. I've done it with yukti, I've done it with logic, I've done it with shastra. I now need to move on to the shukshma sharira, the subtle body, and try and say that you're not the subtle body either. And we're in the final throes of that. Fortunately, he only uses 3 verses to say you're not the subtle body, having exhausted you to say that you're not the physical body, which is the most difficult first task, is to actually abandon this body as being me, something that you've done all your life, is the most difficult thing. And once you do that, the detachment becomes much easier. So with the previous verse 38, which actually completed what would call the analysis of the inquiry into the Sthula Sharira. Sthula Sharira is the gross body, the physical body. Viveka is the inquiry. So that's largely over, and Adi Shankara has established, as I said, through Shruti and Yukti, that Atman is definitely not the body. Now he takes up Shukshma Sharira Viveka. Okay. The instinctive identification with the body is very strong because it is based on an instinctive fear of death. All right. So here Adi Shankara gives the logic to separate Atman from the body. And in this verse, he uses the term linga. All right. Linga. And often he quotes linga instead of Shukshma Sharira. Linga literally means a mark or indicator. Okay. And that's why the stone that is worshipped as Shiva is often called a lingam, because it is a mark or indicator of God. Right? It is not itself God. No particular thing is God. It's an indicator of God. So linga can be used in other ways. For instance, smoke could be called linga for a fire. It's indicated that there's a fire. So any clue or proof of something is called a linga. And Shukshma Sharira is called linga because it reflects consciousness and indirectly reveals the existence of Atman. Because the Shukshma Sharira, the subtle body, is the primary reflective medium for original consciousness, the fact that there is reflected consciousness in the subtle body, the aliveness of the subtle body, eventually the physical body, is proof that there is an original consciousness. Okay. So every mirror is a linga for the object that it is reflecting from, the object that is opposite that. Mirror gives you indirect knowledge because you don't see what is behind, you only see a reflection. So Shukshma Sharira mirror reflects consciousness. Right? And this reflected consciousness this reflection proves that there is a pure consciousness behind it. Okay. So that's why it's a linga. That's why it's so very important to study. Now imagine if Shukshma Sharira, is everybody happy with if I say Shukshma Sharira rather than subtle body? Imagine if Shukshma Sharira could not reflect consciousness. The mind would be inert. So would the body. Since Atman cannot perform any transactions on its own, there'll be no proof for the existence of the body. All right? No proof for the existence of the mind. And therefore, no proof for the existence of Atman. So it's only the fact that the subtle body is reflecting original consciousness, giving us reflected consciousness, that we see in the sentiency of the individual, that is proof that there is an original consciousness from which the reflection comes. If that reflection could not happen, then you wouldn't get reflected consciousness, which means that you wouldn't be able to detect the mind. There would be no sentiency. There would be no sentiency of the body. And because it's not reflecting, you wouldn't know that there was an original consciousness. So without it, you wouldn't see anything. Everything would be without life. Lifeless creation is as good as sunya, non-existence, all right? Nothingness. Because its existence cannot be proved by anyone. Without that reflection, you couldn't prove the existence of Atman. right? Therefore, remember that consciousness is proved because of life, and life itself is proved because of the mind, which is capable of knowing everything, and therefore the mind becomes very important. It is through the mind through which we study, and therefore the mind, and where it is, the Sukshma Sharira, is called Linga. What is it Linga of? It is an indicator of pure consciousness. It is the indicator, and therefore it's called Linga, right? Adi Shankara does not define subtle body in this text, and he takes for granted that you're all brilliant students and you know what a subtle body is, right? It's made up, first of all, of the 5 subtle elements for interacting with the world. The subtle elements, as you know, of space, fire, air, water, earth. It is the instrument of interaction. Our subtle body is the instrument of interaction with the world. It's material in nature, and it serves as an instrument with 17 parts. I mean, these are done for the purposes of study. First of all, you couldn't dissect a subtle body because you'd never be able to find it. All right, that's why it's called subtle. It's imperceptible to our senses. And then to be able to dissect it into 17 parts would be absolutely near on impossible. But without dissecting it further, we can't really study it. The 17 parts typically are the 5 karmendriyas. Endriya means the organs. So karmendriyas, the organs of action. Then the 5 jnanendriyas, the organs of knowledge. The 5 pranas, which are the 5 physiological functions. And then we have the mind, which is the emotional faculty, and buddhi, which is the rational faculty, right? These are the 17. In some documents, they go to 19 by adding ego and memory. Okay, so we can classify it in this way so that it becomes easier to study. All of these put together is the subtle body. And Adi Shankara is saying that I'm not the subtle body. I use the subtle body, but I'm not the subtle body. I use the subtle body in the waking state. I use the subtle body in the dream state. All right? In the deep sleep state, I remain pure consciousness without using any of the instruments of the subtle body. I don't use organs of action because I don't do anything. In sleep, there is no giving or receiving transactions. So transactions, basically, you can say what is a transaction with something else? It's an action of giving or receiving. Giving, you can do it in forms of actions. You can hold somebody, you can lift somebody, you can run, whatever. And then receiving are all the senses that you're receiving knowledge through light, through sound, through taste, and so forth. Right? And in sleep, you're doing none of these transactions. So even when all transactions end, both at the physical as well as the subtle level, when you converse, remember, so what are just trying to get to terms with what these transactions are. When you converse with somebody, certain ideas are transacted, right? When you engage with somebody, certain ideas are transacted, and in the waking and dream state, I have gross transactions with things. So in the waking state, I shake your hand, I punch you in the face, or whatever. In the dream world, I also shake your hand and punch you, but I'm working in another field, all right? So these are grosser, more physical actions. And there are subtle actions as well that I can be doing in terms of exchange of ideas, thoughts, conversations, and so forth through the Sukshma Sharira instruments. In deep sleep, I don't use these instruments. Therefore, I do not transact, right? Therefore, I appear to be non-existent because all my transactional instruments, the sense organs, all the instruments of the mind, they are dormant in deep sleep. I'm just pure existence. I'm unlocated existence, right? Why unlocated existence? When you're in the waking state, do you know where you are? Yes. When you're in dream state, do you know where you are? Yes. When you're in deep sleep, do you know where you are? No. You are unlocated existence. And remember always, and you're not using any of your instruments of the subtle body. An instrument is different from the user of the instrument, right? An instrument is something that I can use and I can discard. And anything that I can use and discard cannot be me. Right? Since I use the Sukshma Sharira as an instrument, I cannot be the Sukshma Sharira, is what Adi Shankara wants to say. And he gives many other reasons, the same old reasons you've heard before. Sukshma Sharira is a composite entity comprising of several parts. We've listed 17 in one model, all right? It's not a homogeneous entity. It's a mixture, an assemblage of 17 parts. But Atman is not a composite entity. Therefore, Sukshma Sharira and Atman cannot be the same. One has parts, the other is partless. How can something that is partless be something with parts? Next, Sukshma Sharira moves from one body to another, the transmigrating soul. Leaving a body, we give it a very peculiar definition. We call it dying. All right? When Sukshma Sharira leaves the body is death, and arriving at the body once more is birth. Not in the birth as in the moment that the fetus comes out of the mother, but the point at which the Sukshma Sharira joins a new Sthula Sharira, new physical body. And there's plenty of Puranas that describe at what stage that happens and things. I'm not going to go into that now, okay? But it happens before birth. Right. The Sukshma Sharira also not only travels horizontally from life to life to life to life like that, but it also appears to go up and down. High lokas, enjoy that for a bit, come back, do some nasty things, go to lower lokas, not enjoy that too much, come back up again. So we're traveling vertically as well as horizontally, all right? By contrast, Atman cannot move. It can't move from one place to another. Why can't Atma move from one place to another? Simple.
It's all pervading.
It is all pervading, it's everywhere. If it's everywhere, there is nowhere that it is not. Where is it going to move to? So the moving linga sharira, or the sukshma sharira, linga, and the motionless atma cannot be one and the same. So one moves in various directions and the other does not move, cannot move. Next, all the 17 parts of Sukshma Sharira I experience. Other people cannot know whether my eyes can see or if I'm blind, right? This is, I mean, you know this for certain. You're the only one who knows whether you can see. That's why, however good the eye surgeon is, or the ophthalmist, and you've gone for glasses, invariably he puts 2 glasses in front of you and say, is it better with A or is it B? I mean, if he's so great, why can't he tell himself? All right? He can't. You're the only one that can tell whether your eyes can see. No instrument can find out whether my sense organs work or not. No other instrument. It has to be me. Similarly, whether ears function or not is only known to me and not to anyone else. So all these conditions, eyes, ears, etc., are known to me, all right? And I must be the knower of the eyes, the knower of the ears and their condition. Therefore, I must be different from the known eyes, from the known ears. The eyes are the subject of experience. Eyes are the object of experience, and Atman is the subject experiencer. Okay? Everybody with me so far? You cannot be the subject and the object at the same time. He cannot be the knower and the known. Next, Atman is free from all modifications. It doesn't have birth, growth, change, decay, death. Shukshma Sharira is subject to modification, right? How do we know that the Shukshma Sharira is subject to modification? Do you get angry? Do you get sad? Right? That's the Shukshma Sharira subject to modification. Anything that is subject to modification must be different to the unchanging Atman. Next, Shukshma Sharira is limited. Why is the Shukshma Sharira limited? Because it's located in the Sthula Sharira. It's located in the physical body. The subtle body is located in the physical body. The subtle body is the content. The physical body is the container. Okay? Wherever there's a Sthula Sharira wherever it is, there's a Shukshma Sharira. All right? Now, to learn anything, you require the Shukshma Sharira only. Right? That's where the mind is. That's where the intellect is, the buddhi is. So why have you brought the Sthula Sharira to class today? All right? Why have you brought your physical body to class today when all you needed was to bring your subtle body along? The subtle body needs the container of the physical body, and therefore the subtle body is confined and limited. Now, it's the age-old thing when somebody asks for a glass of water, you bring them a lovely glass of water, very clear and still, and they say, why have you brought the glass as well? I asked for water. All right? The subtle body requires the container of the physical body. Water cannot be brought without the glass, the container in which it is. Right? There are many Shukshma Shariras. There's many subtle bodies. There are as many subtle bodies as there are physical bodies. But Atman is limitless. Right? How can the limited Shukshma Sharira and the limitless Atman be one and the same? Adi Shankara asks. Right? So Shukshma Sharira is what's known as Asat Rupa, the form of unreal. We'll define this a little bit later. The term that we know is mithya. Right? Unreal is a dependent reality. It is mithya. Right? By now, this word must be tattooed onto your mind. Shukshma Sharira is mithya, dependently existent, whereas Atma is Satrupa or Satya, is independently existent. Atma is independent, the subtle body is dependent. How can the dependent subtle body and the independent Atman be identical? Therefore, this Shukshma Sharira cannot be Atman. So that's basically decomposing the fact that he used just one word for each of these to describe how, in the verse, he described why the subtle body cannot be Atman. Verse 40, he continues. As I said, he only uses 3 verses for this. So it's the second one. The immutable Atman, the substratum of the ego, is thus different from these 2 bodies and is the Purusha, the Ishvara, the self of all. It is present in every form, yet transcends them all. Right. Bit of a tricky one. So in this verse, Adi Shankara, basically, he's concluding the Atma Anatma Viveka discussion. Remember, all of this was to say that we're going to split the world into 2. We're going to split the world into Atma, I, and I'm going to split everything else that is not I'm going to say is not I, Anatma. So Atma, Anatma, viveka, inquiry into the self and non-self. That I'm different from both the physical and the subtle bodies is how he started this interrogation, right? He doesn't in this text discuss Karana Sharira. Karana Sharira is the causal body. It's the tricky one, all right? It is the causal body, not the casual body. It's the causal body because it is the cause of the subtle body and the physical body, right? Everything requires a cause. But really, he doesn't discuss it because Karana Sharira, the causal body, is not very different from the physical body or the subtle body, right? The physical body and subtle body in potential form is called causal body. Right? The physical body and the subtle body in potential form, in unmanifested form, is called causal body. You could say, give you an example, what's the difference between a seed and a tree? The seed is the gross form. In the gross form is a tree, and the tree in potential form is the seed. Okay? Do people follow that? The cause and effect are essentially the same. Let's take that a little bit further. If ice melts into water, what is the difference between ice and water? Right? The difference is only in the state. One is solid and the other is liquid. They're both water, but they're in different states. Karana, the cause, is in unmanifested state, whereas karya, the effect or the product, is in the manifest state. Okay? That is why Karana Sharira is not very different from Sthula Sharira or Sukshma Sharira. Karana Sharira, causal body, is in pralaya, unmanifested state. While the physical body and the subtle body are in Shrishti. Shrishti is a odd word in Sanskrit. It hasn't got an English meaning. Avastha means just state. Shrishti state means the state, the manifestation, the created universe. This state that we see, this environment that we find ourselves is called Shrishti, right? The manifest state. So all the subtle bodies and the physical bodies will go to the causal state in pralaya. They'll all go there. Why? Okay, let's get back to gold. All ornaments will go to the causal gold condition. Right? When the ornaments are melted, you cannot see the ornament state anymore. You have a golden bangle, all right? Its gold is the cause. The effect is the bangle. It's currently in a manifested bangle state, all right? Melt the bangle. The manifestation goes, it goes back into the cause, the causal state. The gold is the potential for the bangle. Right? In the same way, all our bodies, all our sharira, the subtle body and the physical body, will go into the causal state, the karana avastha, the causal state. If I'm different from the effect or product, I must be different from the cause also. All this time, all these verses, he said, you're not the physical body. You're not the subtle body. Since the physical body and the subtle body are the effects, and the cause is the causal body, if I'm not the effect, I cannot be the cause also. Right? This is why Adi Shankara doesn't discuss Karana Sharira separately here. once you say Atman is different and is different from the physical body, from the subtle body, you have to say is different from the Karana body, the causal body also. I'm different from all the two bodies means I'm different from the three bodies. I'm known by the name Atman. I'm all-pervading. I fill up and enliven Purusha. Remember the meanings of Purusha. And I enliven all the bodies, since the bodies are all inert matter. Bit of a technicality, bit of a logical thing, and he snuck it in by implication to say, you're not the physical body, you're not the subtle body, and by the way, you can't be the causal body either. Because of my pervasion, the body is alive. And that's why I'm known as Purushaha, which we defined previously. I'm also known as Ishvara. Now, Ishvara here means the independent principle, because consciousness does not depend on matter, whereas matter has to depend upon a living being. All right. A silly example. A car cannot run by itself. The car is what? Insentient. And it can only move if it's blessed by the sentiency of an individual driver. Right. Either remotely or directly, I could be operating a battery-powered car. All right, it doesn't matter. The controlled always requires a controller. And I am that all-pervading controller that controls all objects that are inert and therefore need to be controlled. I'm the controller, they are the controlled. So first, I know I'm consciousness behind my two bodies, my physical body and my subtle body. But I may commit the mistake that I'm behind the consciousness of my body and you are behind the consciousness of your body. That's the classic mistake to make. I know that I'm conscious, all right? You know that you're conscious. Maybe I've got a conscious of my own through which I know everything going on, and you have one that you know yourself through. And so Adi Shankara says, there is one consciousness alone which is behind my body and all other bodies. He says, how? Like space obtaining in this and other rooms. All right. So the room you're in now, is there space? All right. The room is in the space is not in the room. We only call a room because we build walls that define the space, which is unlimited, into a particular dimension, and we give it a name. All right? You understand that? The old example is pot space. Inside this pot, there's space. All right? I move the pot. Has the space moved? The pot is in space. Space is not in the pot. The pot space is a definition of the space that currently has the body of the pot around it. All right? So we count the rooms, we don't count the space. We count the bulb, we don't count the electricity. Bulbs are many, but electricity is one. Rooms are many, but space is one. The shariras, the bodies are many, but there's only one all-purpose, all-pervading Atma, the consciousness behind all the bodies. I have different names when I function behind different bodies. Here, I'm called a human being when I function through a human body. If I had a long trunk, an elephant body, then I would get the name elephant. If I was functioning through a plant, I would get the name of the plant. Okay? The plurality belongs to the container and not to the content, Atman, which is all beyond everything, he says in this verse. Literally, beyond each and every body, beyond each and every mind. Atman transcends everything, and this really needs to be understood. Because we use the term beyond always in the context of space, a spatial distance. We say so-and-so is beyond Nottingham. All right? Atman cannot be beyond anything if Atman is all-pervading. It's not affected by anything. Just like when we use the term, he's above everything. All right? What do we mean? We mean that family transactions don't affect him. He's above all that. All right? The cinema screen transcends the picture that is being shown. The screen isn't physically away. There's no spatial separation between the screen and the movie. Yet the screen is unaffected by the events of the movie. The screen is beyond the movie. Okay, transcends the movie. It's not a spatial separation. Right? Some people would like to transcend. Some people would like to discover pure consciousness, pure Atman, and sit in meditation for hours and said, I'm going to transcend all my koshas. I'm going to go beyond Anandamaya Kosha and see what there is, because these are just containers. I want to go beyond that and find that Atman, because they consider Atman to be physically beyond. Right? You do not need anything to transcend Atman. If you're seeing the movie, are you seeing the screen? Yes. It is there. Atman is there in the body and the mind as consciousness, Chaitanya. All right. And sometimes you'll hear the use immanent, right? Which means that it's in and through everything. If transcendent is a physical distance, it cannot be immanent because it is in and through everything. If it is to be immanent and transcendental, then transcendent means that it is unaffected, it is beyond. Right? Now, how to transcend anatma? And how long should I meditate to transcend anatma? Because I want to get to atma. I want to go beyond anatma. I want to get to Atma. How do I do that? How long will it take me? You don't need to do anything to transcend Anatma. Right? You simply need to understand that you're not affected by Anatma. You're beyond it. And this knowledge is transcendence. You are unaffected by Anatma. You're not sullied by Anatma. The impurity, the nastiness of the body does not affect the purity of Atma. Right? Therefore, Atma is undecaying. It is free from all changes. By negating decay, the teacher negates all the sixfold modifications and basically saying Atman is changeless. Right. Strong stuff. Shall I do one more verse? How strong are people feeling? You okay? Not asleep yet? Got to look at the sofa. I got to see if Lorraine's asleep. No, she's still ticking. It's pretty good. Kadambari, you can fall asleep if you want to. I know it's quite late for you.
Only just ticking, Ram.
Only just ticking. Okay. All
I
right.
can fall
So-
asleep probably too.
Right. So with verse 40 that we've just completed, the Atma Anatma Viveka is over. And we're going to start a really big inquiry. And I just wanted to introduce this subject because it's the nature of Anatma and the world. But so let's just do this, and we may do partially and come back to it next week. Verse 41. Thus the unique, I don't know what that word is. Does therefore the difference between Atman and the body has indirectly been asserted. Indeed, after the manner of the Tarka Shastra, I'll explain what that is in a minute. The reality of the phenomenal world, but what end of human life is served thereby. I think it says enunciation. Thus, the enunciation of the difference between Atman and the body has indirectly been asserted. Indeed, after the manner of the Tarka Shastra, the reality of the phenomenal world, but what end of human life is served thereby. Reading that translation, you have no clue as to what he's trying to say in that verse. So thank goodness he wrote his own notes for his own text, right? So as I said, Atma and Atma Viveka is over, and we're now starting the equally big inquiry, which is nature of Anatma and the world. And it's the second phase of Vedantic study, which is equally important. If you take the entire inert world, including the causal body, Karana Sharira, it will come under Anatma. That's what we've studied so far. While Ishvara, consciousness, is Atma. Okay? If you haven't got to that by verse 41, go back to the beginning and start again. We're definitely not the physical and subtle body, not even the causal body. They're all Anatma, right? Ishvara consciousness is Atma. Therefore, the individual jiva is a mixture of Atman and Anatman. And the entire Jagat isn't a mixture, it's just Anatma, right? Do you understand? The individual jiva, you and I, we clearly have consciousness within us. So we are a mixture of Atma and Anatma. And the entire Jagat, the entire world, is Anatma. Because we're Atma, entire world is Anatma. So we've reduced everything into a mixture of Atma and Anatma. And after studying Aparokshanubhuti, I can claim I am Atma. Okay? I am consciousness and everything else is matter. We've reduced the world into two, Atma, Anatma. Chaitana, sentient, Achaitana, insentient. We split it between spirit and matter. Okay? Now we've come to Dvaita, duality. Having split the world into two, we've gone into duality. Yet we're trying to study Advaita, not two. We spent the last 40 verses splitting the world into two. All right? And the scripture says, not two. Advaita is what you should be studying. We have to somehow reduce this pair of Atma and Atma to one. If we're going to do justice to studying Advaita Vedanta, then we've got to reduce Atma and Anatma to one. One has to be swallowed into the other. But which is going to swallow and which is the one that's going to be swallowed? Now, scientists want to reduce consciousness into matter. It wants to swallow up consciousness into matter. According to science, life is a product of matter. Get enough cells together and ultimately go, ta-da, it becomes conscious, all right? So life came from matter. And then when the sun explodes, all the lives will be lost, and what will remain is just matter once more. So in science, Atman is swallowed into Anatma. Okay? Consciousness is swallowed into matter. Vedanta says, it's the other way round. Atma has to swallow Anatma. Consciousness has to swallow matter in order to go from two to one. Right? It's all figurative, of course, since we understand that Atma is all there is. If Atma is all there is, there is no Anatma. And we've just spent 40 verses saying that we're definitely not the Anatma, which is separate from us, the Atma. Because at the same time we were saying Atma is all-pervading, there is nothing that Atma is not. This self-knowledge is in what's called Atma Satya. That Atma is Satyam, everything else is Mithya. Consciousness alone appears as matter. In a dream, consciousness alone appears as the sun, lake, or sky. This is coming from your own mind. This topic is important because if we don't establish the reality, if we don't establish the unreality of Anatma, we will forever stay in duality. We'll never get to Advaita. If we cannot dismiss Anatma by saying it's not real, we can never get out of duality. We have distinguished Atma and Anatma, and the student will carry on going with the idea that there's two things. There's Atma, there's Anatma. And what's wrong if duality continues? I've understood it so far, Ram. I don't want to change my ideas now. What's wrong with if there's Atma and Anatma? Because the Upanishads say, as long as there is duality, there will be fear. Because once we come to duality, we come to time and space. This is what I was talking about earlier. Right? Once we come to duality, we come to time and space because it automatically comes. We come to know this in our daily experience. In the waking state, there's duality of time and space. In the dream state, duality of time and space. A different time frame, a different measurement of space, but time and space is there. Only in sleep is duality absent, and we don't have experience of what's called desha kala. Desha means space, kala means time. In deep sleep, we have no experience of desha or kala, no experience of space or time. In Dvaita, duality is Advaita without the A. In Dvaita means duality. In duality, desha kala appears. In Advaita, desha kala disappears. Right? Once desha kala comes, limitations come. This is the answer to the question. Space-wise conditioning is nothing but the feeling of separation, feeling of isolation, feeling of neglect, feeling of rejection. So desha, space, causes isolation, physical and mental. Right? Kala, on the other hand, creates another big limitation of mortality. Kala causes death, aging and death. Fear of old age is waiting to swallow us all up. In sleep, where Dvaitam is absent, duality is absent, where desha kala is absent, there is no fear. Why is there no fear in deep sleep? Because space and time-wise limitations are absent. That's why people are desperate when they're in trouble, just to have a good night's solid sleep where they don't have to worry. And in some Upanishads, deep sleep is compared to moksha. It is your experience of moksha every single night. We all experience moksha daily at the time of sleep. So, Dvaita is samsara because of desha kala, space and time. Therefore, we should see Atman swallowing Anatma, and that is called, perhaps I should put the translation. It's a composite word, but try and figure out what it means. Anatma mithyatvam, right? The tvam means that really in Sanskrit means ness. So it's the mithya-ness of anatma. And mithya is non-reality. So it's the non-reality of matter. All right. We have to arrive at this. We have to arrive at the conclusion that there is no such thing as anatma. And therefore, in this verse, it is posed as a question from a student when introducing this topic of how do we get from duality to non-dual. And the student says, in this manner, you have separated Atma and Deha. Deha normally means body, but here he's referring to everything that's Anatma, the whole Anatma universe, Anatma Prapancha, all right? So you've separated Atma and Deha, Atma and Anatma effectively. The discrimination between the two has been explained, and by this differentiation you've established that there are two things in creation, Atma and Anatma. And once you count two things, both will become real. I'll repeat that. Once you count two things, both will become real. Atma being real is not a problem, but Atma also gets Anatma. Atma being real is not a problem, but Anatma also gets the status of reality. Once you start to talk about two things, and I'm not that second thing, you've made that second thing real. All right? Atma being real is fine, but we've always been told that Anatma is mithya, is unreal. And this cannot be Vedantic teaching, says the student. This is what it's taught by the people who study the Nyaya Vaishika philosophy. And there is often termed Tarka Shastra. Tarka means through argument, through logical argument. So their Shastra, their scriptures are based on just arguing through certain facts into the way that they are. All right? It's another school of philosophy, the Nyaya school of philosophy. And they talk about Atma and Anatma, and they talk of both of them as being Satyam, as being true and real. Different from Advaita Vedanta. All right? In fact, in Tarkasastra, they divide the world, you don't really need this, into 9 materials. The Panchabhuta, the 5 elements, space, time, mind, and Atma. They split the world into 9. All of the 9 are considered to be real, Satyam. Right? The student therefore asks, why do you claim that Vedanta Shastra, right, when yours is so much like the Tarka Shastra? Why is Nyaya Vaishika philosophy negated? What benefits do I get out of this Vedic teaching? Right. Because when Vedanta is introduced itself, Advaita Vedanta is the only school of philosophy that believes in non-duality. That there is only one underlying reality. Everybody else, all the other 5 that believe in the validity of the Vedas, think that there is dualistic, matter and consciousness are separate. And there's another 6 schools of thought who don't believe in the validity of the Vedas at all. These are the 12 principal schools. And there's about another 100 and something or other minor schools of philosophy in India. Right? When Vedanta is introduced, it had to point out the defects of other schools of philosophy. Whenever you introduce a new product, what do you do first of all? This is brighter, sweeter, longer lasting, whatever, whiter than the white. You have to match yourself. You have to sell your own unique selling point against all the others that are already in the market. The unique selling point of Advaita Vedanta is non-duality. Right? All the others accept duality as reality. And we point out, Advaita Vedanta points out, that Dvaita, duality, leads to samsara. Right? And having blamed everybody else as being Dvaitins, people who believe in duality, it would be fruitless to talk about duality in texts like this and say the world is Atma and Anatma. We've suddenly, when our unique selling point was that non-duality, we're suddenly pitching the message of duality. That's why the student is asking, what benefit do I get from studying Advaita Vedanta as opposed to these other philosophical schools? Right? And so we say, we being Vedantins, we say, Atma, Anatma, Viveka, discrimination between Atma and Anatma is only an intermediary step. And finally, we say, there is no Anatma at all. There is no duality. Right. That's what we say. But in order to get there, first of all, we discuss duality, and then we swallow up duality, swallow up Anatma into Atma and make it non-dual. And to do that, he's going to take from verses 41, that was the introductory question by the student, to verse 89. To say, how come you get from this duality of me and the world to only me? How do you get to Advaita Vedanta from all the other schools? Okay. Good stuff, this. Makes the head melt. But half an hour in the fridge after the class will get you all back together again. I'm sure. That was verse 41. That's enough for now. Any questions? This is the main question people ask, because when we had a question early on when saying that, how can I blame God? Then God is myself. So you can blame God in duality, but you can't blame God in non-duality. So we've only done the duality bit, so it's a valid question, right? How do we get from the dualistic teaching that we've had so far and get to the non-dual? Because we have to understand that. That's stage 2. Vedanta is like that. They build you up, build you up. Have you really understood it? Do you really know what could you say to somebody else? And you say yes, and then they say, forget that. It's not actually true. But you need to know that before I can tell you the next bit. You need to know that you're not the body and mind before I tell you the next bit. That the body and mind is also you.
I had a question. I'm aware we might be doing a meditation, but incidentally, what you've just described is just like doing a physics degree. I've felt this before, where you get told one thing and then the next question, next term, you say, no, forget that.
Yeah.
That was told you. But anyways, my question was more about the subtle body and causal body. So at the top of the class, you said an interesting thing that the subtle body joins with a gross body in a new person or entity. What about the causal body? Is the causal body come into existence at that point, or the cause? It's a potential which is out there, and this entity
it's a potential from which the subtle body and the gross body comes, right?
But it's a different one in lifetime, right? It's a different combination. It's a different subtle body with a physical body.
It is so. The causal body creates the subtle body. The subtle body doesn't die, all right? The subtle body transmigrates and finds another physical body. So it's not that you have to have a new causal body for every combination of a subtle body and a physical body. So it's said to be the cause, and it's not known to us. Just as we know the physical body by inspecting it, we know the subtle body just ourselves. Other people can't inspect it, but we can inspect it ourselves. The causal body is completely beyond any type of knowledge as far as we're concerned. And so it's said that the causal body is of the nature of ignorance, right? Because it cannot be known. But it is said to be the unmanifested form from which the subtle body comes in, which is not physical, and then the physical body comes in after that. And it's one of my wonderful diagrams, and that blew people's minds. The causal body is there. It is the finest, unmanifested, but differentiated individual you can have. Because Vedanta always says that nothing can come from nothing. Therefore, the subtle and the gross bodies must come from something, and that's the causal body. And then you say, well, what does the causal body come from? And you say the causal body at the individual level, right, is the nature of ignorance. At the collective level of the universe is the nature of Maya.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Maya comes back in again. And just you knew that it had to, but yeah, it's the thing is, this is all about duality. This is what we've been talking in that last verse. When we talk about these different bodies, where do they come from and everything, that is duality. So we've now got to go from duality to non-dual. When we go to non-dual, there is no separate bodies. Right? There's only the appearance of these bodies.
Yeah.
And as a result, all of that academic brain power that we've given in to try and figure out what is the difference between a subtle body and a causal body suddenly becomes that. It's an academic exercise, because there's no such thing. It's the one underlying reality that appears as all these separate entities. And why does it appear there? Through the power of Maya, giving an apparent appearance of all of this. So we've got to go from duality to non-dual, otherwise we aren't studying Advaita Vedanta. Yeah, that's why the head hurts. Yeah. But yeah, good question. Well done. Anybody else? Or are you just going to contemplate the notes before tackling it again?
I was going to say, you can't go straight to non-dual in the teachings, because you can't. You need the stages.
You live in an experiential world, all right? And therefore you can't go to non-dual. You can say, this is all an illusion. You're in some gigantic dream, all right? It's not really happening. It doesn't work. I mean, any philosophy that doesn't explain each of my experiences is not worth studying, right? And therefore, I have to explain at least the world that I'm in before I find out it's an apparent world and what the real world is actually like. But I have to explain this world. Otherwise, it's not worth studying. So that's what makes it, yeah. I mean, we could have done Aparokshanubhuti really gently, just skim over the top and not get into these ideas. But then, that wouldn't be me. And I suspect that wouldn't be you ultimately, even though you think, God, I really didn't need that on a Wednesday evening. But it encourages other thinking, and is good for you. It's like brown lentils. They taste awful, but they're good for you. It's a bit like that, really.
Who says that? I cook such a lovely way, the brown lentil.
You used to. Sorry, I didn't mean to take a dig. But my brown lentil is nowhere near any good. So I stick to red lentils, which are much easier to cook. And all I do is boil them, and I sometimes get that wrong. Or so I'm told, anyway. The wonders of being married to somebody with a broken leg, that's all I can say. Which is healing. Right. No time for meditation. So, any other questions? Lisa, isn't it good to be back in a live class? Hey, get your brain pickled really fast rather than gently through verses that you can reread.
Well, I'll be pickled twice then. No, it does. It is going in. It's going in. Some of the terms I get a little confused, sort of like the Purusha versus Atman. When you talk about causal body, and then I remember the diagram from Mandukya, like, is it Ishvara and Maya is the causal body, and Brahman and Atman at the top. So this, I think, they're starting to kind of come into place, and then yeah.
And who? I mean, what?
I'll read it again.
It was in Panchadoshi where I did 3 classes just on one slide that had 57 transitions to describe the entire world and how it comes about. I've got a 3-hour talk somewhere. So maybe at some stage I should do that as a separate thing. People who want to really understand how the world is according to Vedanta, then they can see it in a diagrammatic form. Where does Ishvara fit in? Where do these bodies fit in? And what's these fancy words like prapancha and jiva and all these things come in? Tim remembers that, don't you, Tim? No, we can't hear him.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, all right. Enough for now. 1 minute to go. If there's no more questions, we'll close with our final prayer. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishtate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you, everyone.